Transportation will come to order. We're here this morning to talk about developing next-generation technology for innovation. We're joined by a distinguished panel of manufacturers and people who use this product as a critical part of our supply chain, and we welcome all of them who are with us today. One witness joining us virtually from PACCAR, Mr. Preston Fate, and very much appreciate him being able to join us. We're also going to be joined by one of our colleagues who wishes to make a statement, and I'll allow him to do that following Senator Wicker and I. The semiconductor industry is definitely a uniquely American story. It has shown the importance of innovation and building in the United States. The first transistor was demonstrated in New Jersey in 1947. In 1958, Jack Kilby, a Missourian working at Texas Instruments, attended college on the GI Bill and demonstrated the first integrated circuit. The semiconductor industry, with the benefit of federal purchasing power and federal R&D, helped us to get to the moon. It's helped us build our security leadership and has launched the information age economy. So I am pleased that the United States has played such a leadership role. But when it comes to manufacturing today, here in the United States, we are falling behind. Semiconductors underpin nearly every aspect of our national and economic security, and yet we are short on the amount of advanced logic chips building at scale here in the United States of America. That has to change. In fact, over 90% of the most advanced chips come from one island in the Pacific Ocean, Taiwan. I believe in global trade, but I also believe that chip security is as important as food security. That is why we need to continue to demonstrate leadership and make investments in R&D, as the USICA bill that this committee worked so hard to get out last year showed. Our over-reliance on vulnerable global supply chains without having a U.S. alternative ready to go is an economic and national security risk. It's a lesson we've already learned, and we need to change directions. With the automotive sector, thousands of Americans have worked and endured layoffs and shortages. The global automotive industry suffered over $200 billion in losses, and Ford was forced to halt or cut production at least 8 plants in of recent months. The cost of a used car, I wanted to show this chart. The cost of a used car, I don't know where you can show that, sorry. The cost of a used car has gone up 41%, and new cars 12%. A lot of this is due to the semiconductor shortage. Now, let me repeat that. The cost of a used car has gone up 40%. Now, why would that be? Used cars already have the electronics. It's because if you want to buy a new car right now, you're probably going to have to wait because the car companies don't have enough semiconductors. People who can easily afford a new car and need one but can't get one due to the shortage are instead buying the used cars, and that's driving up the price. So anyone knows that the people who can afford to wait the extra 6 months for the new car probably aren't the people who are really feeling the pain. It's the person whose radiator blew out last week and just needs anything on 4 wheels to get them to their job. And that's basic used car that might have gone up $5,000 in cost, an additional 41%. And an extra $2,000, taking that to $7,000, is just a trip the family doesn't get to take, or maybe next month rent that can't get paid. So the impacts of this are really affecting American consumers. Our national security front, Europol, just reported this month that counterfeiters are trying to exploit the semiconductor shortage by introducing fake chips into the market, raising the chances that critical infrastructure and defense systems could be compromised. The shortage is also a setback for our efforts to remove foreign telecommunication electronics that could be compromised by backdoors from other governments. According to the telecommunications industry, wait times for some networking equipment is now 50 weeks. The cost of some networking equipment has risen 12%, and price gougers are selling chips for 100 times their regular price. That is no way to build out the access to our broadband. In addition, we know that relying heavily on one country and largely one company creates a lot of targets for hackers. 18 months ago, security researchers found hacking campaigns that compromised at least 7 Taiwanese chip manufacturers to steal semiconductor chip designs. All of these are reasons why we need to get USICA done and make sure that we get to conference with our colleagues. These bills have a $2 billion investment specifically for our Department of Defense to secure the microelectronic supply chain required for our national security missions. The shortages that we have today, if we don't address them, are going to continue well into the future. That is because the world needs 1 trillion chips to be produced. Actually, that was in 2018. 2021, we need 1.2 trillion chips basically produced every year. In 2031, that will be 2 trillion chips per year. So our current foundries are already working overtime. Building new foundries has to be part of the long-term solution, and we need to send that price signal today. If we do nothing, these shortages are just an example of what is to come. I know we're going to hear from PACCAR, who's going to tell us about how every aspect of freight is being affected, even if it's not a high-tech product. If you don't have trucks to move the products in our supply chain because you don't have enough trucks, then we are affecting every aspect of the supply chain. So clearly we're here to talk about the next generation of chips and how the United States keeps its leadership in advanced manufacturing. That's why, Mr. Archer, we're obviously going to hear from you as well on lithography and how important it is for the United States to stay ahead. But we're so happy to be joined by the witnesses today. It's 288 days since the Senate passed this USICA bill. It's now time for us not to wait another day, but to get this done and keep America's leadership going in the right direction. With that, I turn to my ranking member, Senator Wicker.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Madam Chair. And good morning. Today's hearing on semiconductors could not be more opportune, and I dare say there's not a more important hearing anywhere on Capitol Hill this morning. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fragility of the supply chains we depend on for public health, national security, and economic prosperity. Semiconductors are the lifeblood of modern industrial production, and the chip shortage over the past 2 years has caused and made worse many of our supply chain disruptions. Today's witnesses play key roles in the broader semiconductor ecosystem, which includes equipment manufacturers, chip producers, and industries that consume large quantities of chips. I would like to extend a special welcome across the sea to Preston Fite, CEO of PACCAR, a company that's very important to Senator Cantwell and me. For over a decade, the PACCAR facility in Columbus, Mississippi, has produced hundreds of thousands of world-class engines for heavy trucks and provided good-paying jobs for a talented and motivated workforce. I hope Mr. Fite and our other witnesses can give the committee a sense of the impacts posed by the chip shortage on their businesses, their workers, and America's global competitiveness. Although semiconductors have become vastly more important to global commerce, the United States has for decades neglected the industry. America's share of global semiconductor manufacturing has fallen from nearly 40% in 1990 to about 12% today. Foreign governments, including China, seized on the lack of U.S. leadership in this area, and as a result, we are now entirely dependent on foreign production of the most cutting-edge chip technology. Chip production, R&D, innovation, and high-paying jobs all went overseas, leaving us dangerously exposed. The committee would benefit from our witnesses' perspectives on how we got to this situation, and specifically why other countries have displaced the United States as the center of gravity in semiconductors. The good news is that Congress has an opportunity to restore American leadership in semiconductors in both the short and long run. I'm hopeful that the House and Senate leaders will soon come together in conference committee to reconcile the differences between the Senate-passed U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, USICA, and the House-passed America Competes Act. Both bills include the CHIPS Act, which would provide tens of billions of dollars to incentivize domestic chip manufacturing, stabilize the semiconductor supply chain, and make long-term investments in R&D. For our part, Senator Cantwell and I helped shepherd USICA to passage in the Senate by a 68-32 vote last summer. We are ready to go, as the chair indicated. I'm confident that a fair conference process will produce landmark legislation to keep America ahead of the pack in R&D and innovation. I would also ask our witnesses to comment on the importance of the CHIPS Act and what it would mean for their businesses. Vladimir Putin's illegal war on Ukraine has shown what can happen when we rely on dictators to maintain economic stability. Russia's criminal war of aggression has exposed long-term dependencies and sent the prices for gas, wheat, and industrial metals soaring. Unfortunately, Russia is not the only strategic competitor with designs on other countries. China has also demonstrated aggressive behavior toward Taiwan and stated its intent to challenge Taiwan's sovereignty and independence. Taiwan now accounts for 92% of the world's most advanced semiconductor manufacturing capacity. Think of the consequences if China were to invade our Taiwanese partner. Let us keep that scenario in mind as Congress continues its critical work of restoring American leadership in this vital industry. Thank you, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. That I also agree with your statement. So you and I are on the same page, and hopefully we're going to get our colleagues on the same page. We've been joined by the chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Wyden, who's played a leadership role in chip legislation and is here to introduce one of our witnesses. Senator Wyden, welcome to the Commerce Committee, a committee that you served on for quite some time, but still keep very close tabs on you, and you keep very close tabs on us, particularly when it comes to privacy legislation. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell and Ranking Member Wicker, both for your important remarks and for the chance to be able to introduce the CEO of Intel, Mr. Pat Gelsinger. And as Senator Cantwell noted, I am a proud alum of the Commerce Committee. And Senator Wicker, I also recall that brevity is appreciated for the cause, and I will be brief. It's been nearly 50 years since Intel's first investment in my home state of Oregon, and the company Pat Gelsinger leads is now my home state's largest private employer. Upwards of 20,000 Oregonians work at Intel. These colleagues are good-paying jobs that not only add to our state's economic vibrancy, they help to keep Oregon and our country at the forefront of tech leadership around the world. A little over a year ago, Pat returned to Intel, where he spent 3 decades earlier in his career. He and I have had many discussions about what chip manufacturing means to Oregon and the entire country. From the time the typical American gets up in the morning to when they go to bed at night, and sometimes even while they are sleeping, they interact with thousands of semiconductors. Congress is finally waking up to the fact that computer chips are the beating heart of the 21st century economy. Pandemic-era breakdowns in semiconductor supply chains made it very clear how essential chips are to the health of our economy and our everyday lives. With that understanding, there's a big bipartisan interest in supporting a vibrant domestic chip manufacturing sector. Under Pat's leadership, Intel is stepping up. Intel has committed to continued investment in Oregon and committed to putting billions of dollars of their money to build new manufacturing capacity in the United States. Now, as you both have noted, the Congress has got to step up and do its part to launch America's chip manufacturing revival. There is a big opportunity ahead of us to build a more resilient economy and create many thousands of high-skill, high-wage jobs in our country. Pat and his team at Intel are going to be at the forefront of the effort. Let me close with this. If Congress fails to do its part, you both have made it clear our country is going to pay dearly. That's why failure here is unacceptable, and it's important to recognize that this is the beginning of a much larger effort. Everybody up here has got a busy schedule, so thank you for giving me the chance to introduce Pat Gelsinger, CEO of Oregon's largest private employer, and I appreciate the chance that he will have to describe what his company's work is all about and why it's so critical to my home state of Oregon and our country's economic future.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. And again, we know how busy everybody's schedule is today. We appreciate it, and I'm sure our witnesses do, and particularly Mr. Gelsinger. So with that, Mr. Gelsinger, please start us off.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and Senator Wyden. Thank you for that most kind introduction, and to the members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today and for your support for funding the CHIPS for America Act. Every aspect of human existence is becoming digital, and everything digital runs on semiconductors. We provided you samples of some show and tell, right? Our most advanced high-performance computing components. The latest generation of 7-nanometer server and client products, and the first ever samples of our 4-nanometer next generation client product as well. This is what we're talking about today, the most advanced components on Earth. Semiconductors are the foundation for technologies, including artificial intelligence, 5G, autonomous vehicles, and IoT. Our economic and national security are dependent on semiconductors. Digital transformation has led to unprecedented demand for chips, made more acute by the COVID pandemic and disruptions in our global supply chain. The chip shortage cost the U.S. economy $240 billion last year. We now expect the shortage will continue into at least 2024. America showed leadership when Congress passed the CHIPS Act, but the situation has grown even more serious since then, and the supply chain shortage is truly global. While the EU began its work on their CHIPS Act a year later than Congress, I'm expecting EU funding will be made available this year. Similarly, other governments are aggressively offering significant incentives to semiconductor companies like ours to build fabs on their shores. Senators, we must look beyond short-term capacity and recognize what U.S. chip leadership truly entails with 4 areas of focus. Incentivize manufacturing on U.S. soil. Second, supercharge research and development. Third, address the skills gap. And fourth, enhance our national defense. When it comes to manufacturing, the world needs geographically balanced, resilient supply chains. In 1990, 80% of semiconductors were built in U.S. and Europe. Today, 80% is in Asia, with only 12% in the U.S. and half of that being Intel. Asian countries moved aggressively to attract this industry with strong incentive policies. As a result, the operating cost to manufacture in East Asia is 30 to 50% cheaper compared to the U.S. This is particularly significant for an investment of this scale. A modern, advanced semiconductor fab costs $10 billion to build and equip. Global semiconductor demand is projected to double by the end of the decade to $1 trillion. Currently, only the United States, South Korea, and Taiwan can manufacture the leading-edge chips that power everything from your computer to the Joint Strike Fighter. For our entire 53-year history as a company, we have performed the majority of our R&D and manufacturing in the U.S. We have put our chips on the table to help the U.S. regain process technology and manufacturing leadership. In the last year alone, Intel has announced over $43 billion of U.S. manufacturing investments with expansions in New Mexico, 2 new fabs in Arizona, and our landmark Ohio investment. Our initial hub in Ohio will establish the first advanced semiconductor in the Midwest. From the company that helped create Silicon Valley, we're now creating the Silicon Heartland. At full build-out, assuming we receive support from the CHIPS Act, the total investment from the site could grow to as much as $100 billion over the next decade. We have also thrown our factory doors open wide to provide capacity for U.S. and global foundry companies. We seek to rebuild the entire supply chain on U.S. soil. Intel is one of the world's top R&D spenders. In 2021, we invested more than $15 billion in R&D. Intel strongly supports the creation of the National Semiconductor Technology Center, or NSTC, and the National Advanced Packaging Manufacturing Program through the CHIPS Act. I also implore Congress to restore the ability to fully deduct R&D expenses, a policy that has been in place for decades. These research partnerships and a restored R&D deduction will continue to drive a lab-to-fab pipeline. Our workforce consists of well-paying jobs across the spectrum of construction, skilled manufacturing, and research. Increasing access to STEM education is essential for building a talented, diverse pipeline of future technologists. Intel detailed just last week our plans to invest $100 million over the next decade in partnership with community colleges, universities, and the U.S. NSF. Lastly, building up of U.S. commercial capacity is essential for defense and national security. We seek to have vibrant, world-leading commercial capacity that can be leveraged for the additional requirements of defense and intelligence. Further, we encourage a strong and increasing partnership with the EU to meet our mutual global needs. Almost all of the critical technologies in semiconductor equipment and manufacturing are in the U.S. or in the EU. I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify today for the committee's support of the CHIPS Act. We are slated to break ground in Ohio this year. I challenge Congress to find a path forward on CHIPS Act funding before then. I want to go bigger and faster. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gelsinger. Thank you so much for that testimony, and hopefully we'll get to the questions and we can go drilled in on some of this technology and why it's so important in its application. Mr. Marotra, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate that Micron is a Pacific Northwest business, even though you're located in 7 different states. And I know you've been CEO since 2017 and award winner of IEEE awards for distinguished contributions for your technology. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of the committee. I'm honored to appear before you to discuss the semiconductor industry and its importance in helping the United States maintain global... Sorry. So let me start over again. Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of the committee, I'm honored to appear before you to discuss the semiconductor industry and its importance in helping the United States maintain global competitiveness and secure a leadership role in semiconductor manufacturing and critical future innovation and technology. I commend this committee for its leadership on these important issues. With your permission, I will submit my full statement for the record. Escalating geopolitical risks have highlighted the urgency to reconcile and pass an innovation and competition bill that includes full funding for the CHIPS Act and the Investment Tax Credit, part of the Bipartisan FABS Act. These 2 incentives together would invigorate domestic manufacturing in the semiconductor industry and allow companies to invest with confidence for the future. Together, these developments will kickstart investment in workforce development, R&D, innovation, and expansion of manufacturing in the near term. Memory is at the leading edge of semiconductor manufacturing technology, and Micron is leading the world in this technology. We are proud of the almost 50,000 patents that we hold as a company. Memory chips can be found anywhere that data is stored or processed: cell phones, automobiles, computers, defense systems, and memory is truly foundational for all future technological innovation and development. Micron is the only company developing leading-edge memory and storage technology in the US, with operations in 9 different states. We are headquartered in Boise, Idaho, with 43,000 team members worldwide. Nearly 10,000 of our employees are US-based. We also recently opened an advanced memory design center in Atlanta, Georgia, our first location in the Southeast, giving us access to outstanding and diverse STEM talent. I hope to leave you with one key takeaway today. The US government needs to level the playing field and create incentives to support investment in domestic semiconductor manufacturing facilities. Nearly every other country that has a significant share of semiconductor manufacturing offers major government incentives, including grants and tax breaks. Our federal government does not. Funding under the CHIPS Act and a refundable investment tax credit are both needed to ensure the development and continued visibility of a scaled-up industrial base and to guarantee the domestic supply of semiconductors, both leading-edge and legacy chips, into the future. I want to emphasize that the CHIPS legislation is necessary but not sufficient. The refundable investment tax credit is equally important to enable confident long-term investments in significant manufacturing infrastructure. Micron has announced plans to invest more than $150 billion globally over the next decade in leading-edge memory manufacturing and research and development. We continue to explore plans to build new fabs in the United States. Our expansion plans, if executed, would constitute one of the largest single semiconductor investment in the history of the United States, require close coordination with federal and state partners to ensure the economic viability of our operations in a global competitive marketplace. However, to be commercially viable over the long term, memory and storage fabs must produce at very high volumes consistently. Multiple facilities are required to achieve this scale, each costing more than tens of billions of dollars, fully equipped. Technological advancements are increasingly complex and expensive. Our competitors abroad have benefited from 35 to 45% lower operating costs due in part to the investments of other governments. This is a momentous opportunity to change that trajectory and put the U.S. on competitive ground for the future. I urge all parties to help pass both the CHIPS Act and the FABS Act into law. CHIPS funding and the refundable investment tax credit will set the stage for a transformational investment in large-scale leading-edge memory manufacturing in the United States and ensure the United States does not lose out to its competitors abroad. Thank you again, Chair Candwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and we appreciate you being here. We're now going to go to Mr. Preston Feit, who is joining us from Europe, actually, but PACCAR is located in the state of Washington. We're very proud of them as a manufacturer of medium and heavy-duty trucks and a leader in that in the world. I know he wanted to be here in person, but it's so important to get his viewpoint on how this shortage affects the supply chain and, more importantly, the transition to where PACCAR would like to go if we can continue U.S. leadership on the R&D side. And very much appreciate you joining us. Thank you, Mr. Feitz. We'll go to you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and other distinguished members of the committee. Thanks for inviting me to testify today. PACCAR is the manufacturer of iconic Peterbilt, Kenworth, and DAF trucks. Our truck brands represent nearly 30% of the Class 8 market in the US and Canada, and around 16% of the heavy-duty truck market in Europe. PACCAR was founded in 1905 and is an American-owned manufacturer of heavy trucks. We're headquartered in Washington State, and our great people operate state-of-the-art factories that build Kenworth trucks in Washington State and Ohio, Peterbilt trucks in Texas, and PACCAR engines, as noted earlier, in Mississippi. PACCAR also has engineering and innovation centers in Washington State, Texas, and California, and that's where we develop our technology-leading zero-emissions, autonomous, and connected vehicles. Thanks for your bipartisan work to address the semiconductor supply shortage. The chip shortage has been limiting the production of commercial trucks for a year now. This has led to a shortage of trucks to move goods throughout the country, distributed supply chains across numerous industries, raised prices for consumers, and delayed access to critical goods and services for businesses and communities. Over 70% of all freight tonnage that moves in America is transported on a truck. Over 80% of US communities depend exclusively on trucks to deliver food and agricultural products, fuel and medicine, manufacturing inputs, business supplies, and consumer goods from groceries to automobiles. We all experienced the importance of the trucking industry during the pandemic, and more trucks are needed now to build new housing, highways, bridges, clean energy infrastructure, and communications networks. Basically, America's economy moves on trucks, and truck manufacturers and suppliers need an adequate and predictable and affordable supply of semiconductors to build and keep trucks on the road. Instead, we continue to face shortages. Today, throughout the industry, thousands of unfinished trucks are parked across the country waiting for chip-enabled components, and additional trucks are out of service waiting for repair parts. This is disturbing considering the entire U.S. Class 8 trucking market requires an estimated 13 million semiconductors last year, compared to a total semiconductor industry output of over 1 trillion chips. So just 1 out of every 86,000 semiconductors is needed to keep America and its supply chains moving. A year ago, during the pandemic, there were legitimate force majeure events, such as COVID-related plant shutdowns, an ice storm in Texas, and a fire in Japan that led to chip delays. To help mitigate the issues associated with those events, truck manufacturers spent a tremendous amount of money on medium and long-term engineering redesigns to help reduce the impact of chip constraints, and have engaged with chip producers to align on best practices. Still, shortages remain, and truck OEMs have paid premium prices to purchase chips on the broker market when it's not possible to purchase chips directly from industry suppliers and chip manufacturers. These broker prices are often 20 to 30 times higher than contract prices. Furthermore, manufacturers continue to receive a lack of clarity on semiconductor delivery schedules and experience cancellations from our suppliers, often with inadequate visibility being provided. These semiconductors are critical to support the necessary production of trucks, and this creates turmoil for all manufacturers who must manage immediate production changes or be forced to shut down plants. Simply put, the fabric of America is adversely impacted when truck factories are forced to shut down or curtail production due to these shortages. To address the costly impact on America's trucking industry and broader economy, we suggest that companies requesting CHIPS Act funding be required to meet the needs of American critical businesses, including truck manufacturers, before they're approved to receive U.S. taxpayer dollars. This could be accomplished using the Essential Critical Infrastructure Workforce Guidance developed by DHS, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which was used throughout the pandemic to ensure continued operations of critical national functions. We're concerned that without upfront conditions on the use of CHIPS Act funding, the ongoing chip supply constraints and allocations could limit trucks from delivering essential goods and services to our communities. To ensure the accountability of this public funding and provide near-term relief to America's trucking industry and supply chains, we recommend that applicants for CHIPS Act funding be required to submit a plan to the Commerce Department detailing how their existing semiconductor allocation strategy and investment decisions are currently and will in the future prioritize the production of semiconductors to support critical infrastructure industries and related jobs in the United States. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our experience and perspective and for your efforts to strengthen America's economic competitiveness. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fight, and thank you for that suggestion on focusing on critical businesses. I think it is really important in a time of shortage for us to be very specific about what our needs are and how we accomplish them. So thank you for that. And again, I don't know what time it is in Europe, but we appreciate you communicating with us here. We'll now turn to Mr. Archer. I'm so pleased that all our panelists are not only CEOs, but engineers. It gives us a chance to dig deep onto some of the science that we're trying to get right, which is part of the mission of USICA, is the innovation side of science and the R&D investment, and particularly the translational side. That's what USICA is about, how to translate the science faster. So, Mr. Archer, your company, we can't just build fabs. We have to have the equipment and the tools in the fabs that do the work that help us keep our cutting edge. You bring together physics, and you're a physicist, so materials, robotics, and other fields that we need to be leading edge in the United States in manufacturing. So we look forward to hearing your view on this part of the infrastructure that we need. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, Ranking Member, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm Tim Archer, President and CEO of Lam Research, one of the world's largest semiconductor manufacturing equipment companies. Simply put, Lam Research makes the machines that make the chips. Headquartered in California, we have more than 16,000 employees worldwide. We are a world leader in developing state-of-the-art manufacturing equipment that brings together diverse disciplines such as plasma physics, material science, advanced robotics, and artificial intelligence to create nanoscale semiconductor fabrication solutions. The complex machines we develop enable companies like Intel and Micron to produce their sophisticated integrated chips in high volume. I would like to thank you and others in Congress for the vision you have shown towards addressing both the challenges and opportunities facing the U.S. semiconductor industry. While recent events like the chip shortage have put a spotlight on the challenges, I would like to stress that U.S. leadership in semiconductor manufacturing technology is strong. Our competitiveness is rooted in the innovation, drive, and resourcefulness of American companies and workers across the semiconductor ecosystem. And I am proud of the role that Lam Research and our employees have played for more than 4 decades in setting the pace for innovation and in maintaining U.S. leadership in the global market. Today, semiconductors form the foundation of our smarter, faster, and more connected digital world. I believe it is vital that we create a secure and resilient supply of semiconductors while also accelerating innovation ahead of the rapidly evolving technological complexity. Congress recognized the importance of both supply and innovation and is taking bold steps to strengthen the semiconductor ecosystem through the CHIPS Act, which will fortify our supply chain, workforce, and domestic research and development. I believe this partnership of industry and government will contribute to U.S. leadership in semiconductor technology well into the future. As you continue to work on these efforts, I would highlight 3 areas that could benefit from your continued consideration. First, an all-of-ecosystem approach. The chip shortage we're experiencing highlights the complex and interdependent nature of the semiconductor ecosystem and the need for sustained investment by companies throughout the supply chain. Lam Research has increased our workforce in the United States by over 45% in the past 2 years alone, adding more than 3,500 jobs, including high-paying engineering and advanced manufacturing jobs at our facilities in California, Oregon, and Ohio. However, we also rely on hundreds of American suppliers, many of whom are struggling to keep up with the rapid pace of growth while dealing with the lingering effects of the pandemic and a tight labor market. We are grateful policymakers recognize these challenges and intend to support the industry comprehensively through the Commerce Department's grant program established in the CHIPS Act, as well as through important R&D programs like the Investment Tax Credit found in the FABS Act. We urge Congress to act quickly to pass these measures in support of the entire domestic ecosystem. Second, leveraging existing infrastructure. Together, government and industry can leverage existing infrastructures that have a history of driving technology development. Partnerships with academia and with the national labs provide extensive capabilities and expertise critical to any collaborative innovation strategy. In our area, plasma research is particularly key to the future of semiconductor tool development. We are grateful to see legislative proposals such as the Microelectronics Research for Energy Innovation Act move forward to streamline coordination and better deploy federal resources, including the national labs, to sustain these partnerships. And finally, enabling shared innovation. There is an outstanding opportunity to strengthen U.S. competitiveness by bringing together industry, government, academia, and the national labs in a centralized and collaborative space to enable shared innovation. The establishment of the National Semiconductor Technology Center, NSTC, will provide a new pathway to sustaining U.S. technology leadership by creating opportunities to explore new ideas and quickly transition breakthrough technologies to the production line. So in closing, we believe it is vital that we prioritize innovation, competitiveness, collaboration, and supply chain security to maintain U.S. leadership in this critical global industry. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Thank you so much for that. I love the collaboration focus, particularly because I heard a TED talk about this, that collaboration is the next form of innovation, because you can have the innovation, but if you don't collaborate to get it in, to implement it, then you don't have it. So around here, we have to be more collaborative for sure. So I'm going to yield to my colleague for the first round of questions, and then let our colleagues who might be joining us remotely, that we would then go to Senator Klobuchar and then Senator Thune, and then I'll jump in later with my questions, but I'll turn to Senator Wicker.
Well, Madam Chair, feel free to jump in at any point, because I think you and I are teammates on this. Let me start with Mr. Gelsinger. America's share of global semiconductor manufacturing is 12% today. Where's the other 88%? Let's just sort of summarize what we've learned so far. And I think you have to press the button.
Pardon. Thank you. The largest portion is in Asia, right, led by Taiwan, Korea, China, and Japan. So approximately 80% is in Asia, and about 9% in Europe, and about 12% in the U.S.
Okay. And the reason for that, we've gone from 40% in 1990 to 12% today. It's just more cost effective for companies to manufacture the semiconductors in those Asian locations. Is that correct?
I believe there are primarily two effects. One is the Asians aggressively pursued this industry with very strong policies and high incentives. It was also much of the...
Financial incentives provided by governments.
Primarily.
Like, what do they do in Taiwan and China?
The incentives, typically could be 30 to as much as even 70% for some of the capital incentives in China. So very strong capital incentives have been available, and those countries have recently announced major expansions of those programs. For instance, Korea just announced a $100 billion capital incentive program for their semiconductor industry.
And then that's one factor.
Yeah.
The government incentives.
And then additionally, many of the lower end supply chains were already in Asia. And so it's a consolidation of the supply chain. So it ends up being a more efficient overall supply chain that they've built up.
For example?
For example, power supplies, sheet metal enclosures, displays. They've consolidated, and a lot of this in China specifically around the supply chain consolidation that's occurred there. So more efficient supply chains, all focused on cost. And as we say, the focus has been on cost, not on resilience. We believe we need a globally balanced, more resilient supply chain for the future. And what we're suggesting in the CHIPS Act essentially is rebalancing that 30 to 50% gap that we spoke about, allowing the U.S. industry to be competitive as we compete for the global market.
And labor costs are part of this.
The labor costs certainly are a factor, but for fabs, it is primarily capital cost, right? As the largest portion, the depreciation of capital cost dominates the overall cost. Labor costs play larger portions in other areas of the supply chain.
Mr. Matroka, you want to add anything to this line of questioning?
I would just add, thank you. I would just add that today in the US, there is 2% of the semiconductor memory manufacturing. 98% of the semiconductor memory manufacturing is in Asia today, for the very reasons that Pat articulated, that over the course of last 20 years, Asian governments have supported the bringing semiconductor industry onshore in various countries that Pat outlined earlier as well. And the 2% that is being produced here in the US actually is being produced by Micron, close by in Manassas, Virginia. And of course, we have leading edge R&D center in Boise as well. It is imperative that the 35 to 45% cost difference that exists for manufacturing in Asia to build and operate these leading edge fabs, that gap is overcome through CHIPS Act and investment tax credits in order to be able to bring more manufacturing back onshore and really provide sustainable, long-term, resilient operations. And again, memory is important because memory represents nearly 60% of wafer production worldwide in semiconductors. We need to bring more memory production in the US along with the rest of the semiconductor ecosystem advancement in order to really ensure that the economic prosperity and global leadership for semiconductors and national security considerations are met.
So it's fair to say that governments in these locations around the world have made a decision to spend government funds to incentivize the production of these chips in their jurisdictions.
Yes, that's a good,
And if we're going to get them back, we're going to have to do as the CHIPS Act suggests and as USICA suggests, and spend some money, some government money out of the federal treasury through either grants, loans, or tax incentives to incentivize manufacturing here in the United States.
yes, we would say that's a very good summary. And I'd also emphasize that we've seen recently that the world is recognizing the criticality of the semiconductor industry, and we've seen actions as part of the Europeans, Indians, Chinese, Koreans, and Taiwans very recently to further incentivize these industries on their shores. So the criticality and the urgency, as we've said, is nigh before us. The world is moving quickly on the importance of this industry on their soil.
Senator Johnson, you're next, but I'm going to take some leeway to ask Mr. Feit, are we ready in the United States with a workforce trained well enough for getting this global percentage back from 12% up to where it ought to be? And what do we need to do in that regard?
Well, Senator Wicker, I think, from our experience with the U.S. workforce, which is extensive, over 100 years, we have an amazing workforce. We have great people in all of our locations that have high skills, whether that's in the Silicon Valley offices we have in California or whether that's in Mississippi. So yes, we have great workforce, but obviously training is needed on the specific skills for these industries as we develop them here.
And I believe there's a partnership with East Mississippi Community College, MUW, and Mississippi State University that's helpful to your Columbus facility. Is that correct?
That is very correct. We have had such wonderful experiences with our universities and schools around the area to develop people and to put them into great careers and jobs. You're absolutely correct.
Thank you very much. More questions later. Senator Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gelsinger. So again, these are interesting statistics. Only 12% of chip manufacturing here in the U.S., primarily because other countries have provided industrial policy, basically, and they provided financial incentives for your industry to move overseas. Did the U.S. chip industry, did you ever consider, as you were moving all this manufacturing overseas and just the risk to your own industry, not to mention national security?
I'm very proud to say that Intel has remained primarily on U.S. soil over this period of time. And the vast majority of our investments are in U.S. and European soil, with a very small amount in Asia. Where really what's happened is the rest of the industry has moved dramatically over this period of time, largely responding to these incentives that we've described. Of our investments, well over half of them land on U.S. soil, with approximately a third in Europe. We've been one of the few companies that have remained highly dedicated to U.S. R&D and manufacturing investments over the entirety of our 53-year history. The trends that we've described have clearly affected the rest of the industry in a most dramatic way.
So of the 12% produced in the U.S., how much is that, what percentage of that 12% is Intel?
About half.
About half. Obviously this would be considered unfair trade practices, correct? When you've got different countries subsidizing industry, putting it, at a competitive advantage because of government subsidies. So I guess there's two ways of approaching that. You can slap tariffs on that, or you can, I guess, try and start your own industrial policy here in the United States, which is apparently the path we're taking. Does that pretty well sum things up?
Well, and we'd also emphasize that without such actions, right, we see that foreign countries, as we've already indicated in the testimony, are taking very aggressive steps, and they view and understand the criticality of semiconductors underlaying every aspect of the digital future. And that's why we speak with such urgency and passion on this topic to be restored in American soil. This is foundational to every other industry and every other aspect for it. And thus, we believe it's justified to take such steps as the CHIPS Act, as the FABS Act, and now, we would say that this industry, one that was born in the United States, right? This is our industry that underscores every aspect of humanity looking forward. Now is the time for action.
I think my concern is when government starts attempting to allocate capital, it just screws things up. It doesn't do it very efficiently or effectively. So again, I'm concerned as opposed to pushing the unfair trade practice route, going that route, to just, well, let's join in. Let's engage in the same type of activity. Ends up with a misallocation of capital. Are you concerned about that? Because you have government picking the winners and losers in this case.
Given what we've seen worldwide, the 30-year trend is dramatic, right? These actions are not overnight actions that have been taken by foreign nations. While clearly there are concerns on how capital is allocated, right? Without such steps, our industry will be further undermined. We will lose critical mass, I believe, in the near future, and we will never have the opportunity to restore this industry on American soil. That's why we're here.
Can you give me just sort of the macro numbers we're talking about here? How many dollars of capital have been provided in what I would consider unfair trade practices by our overseas competitors? I mean, how many hundreds of billions of dollars?
Well, just in the last year, we've seen the Europeans suggest $45 billion, the Koreans suggest $100 billion, the Chinese suggest over $100 billion. These are very significant investments. And what we're seeking in the CHIPS Act is to unleash public, private, right, leveraged investments where these investments would unleash, $3 to $4 for every dollar that's put into it, as well as the research investments are long-term, right? These are, our industry was born out of DARPA investments decades ago. These are long-term investments as well as near-term reversal in the manufacturing footprint that is most critical to the world.
There is plenty of capital available to invest in semiconductors in the U.S., though, correct? It's not like we're short of capital.
There's plenty of capital.
It's just that there's unfair trade practices being engaged in by other countries.
Other countries have seen the criticality of this industry and have invested in it as seed corn for so many other aspects of the technology industry. That's why they've chosen to take such practices aggressively. And we, see that such actions need to be taken in the U.S. to restore this industry. Now's the time to act.
It's almost mutually assured destruction, isn't it? It's going to be a race to the bottom. Again, I'm a real unabashed free trader. I don't like tariffs, but I almost hate government allocation of capital worse.
Well, as we think about things like tariffs and other export policies, by putting those in place, we're actually further hurting American industry because other countries are not putting such limitations or practices in place on their industry. So to say that it's not helping our industry, right, but hurting it instead, right, is very odd logic. We need to take steps to restore American competitiveness, to improve our trade practices and export practices globally. And to do that, right, partnering with our friends globally is critical as well. Now's the time to act, or this industry may never be back on American shores.
I'm fully aware that tariffs hurt American consumers. I got that. But again, I'm just concerned about engaging in this race to the bottom in terms of now government across the world is going to be doing the capital investment for a particular industry. I just think that long-term is not a good solution.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to go next, but Senator Wicker wanted to make a quick comment.
Just to follow up on something you said, Mr. Gelsinger, in response to a question Senator Johnson raised, when was the significant DARPA investment early on, and to what extent did the government supply funds to get us started there?
Many of the original elements of the semiconductor industry date back to Bell Labs, date back to the earliest days of DARPA. Many of those investments were made 50, 60 years ago that have produced many of the core technologies that the internet, that semiconductors, that AI runs on today. These are very long-term research investments. That's why we see things like the NSTC portion of the CHIPS Act a critical aspect, because we're not worried about just the next decade of this industry, but decades of this industry to the future.
And do you, this will be the last, do you know if Trans-Pacific Partnership would have addressed some of these problems that Senator Johnson was asking about?
I'm a big believer in the TPP. I believe that would be good policy to work closely, right, with both our European allies as well as our Asian allies. These are countries that want to work with us. Also, as I mentioned in my oral testimony, many of these countries together represent almost all of the semiconductor technologies and equipment in the world, right? Aligning with our partners in TPP, also the technology trade cooperation that's been initiated between the US and Europe. We view these policies as very positive ones that we fully support.
Well, Madam Chair, maybe the witness could supplement his answer on the record, specifically about whether TPP addressed the subsidy of other governments of this type of research in answer to the inquiry of Senator Johnson. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. And I'm going to take my round now. I know we have other members who are waiting, and hopefully we will get to them. And then if people want a second round, we'll be here as long as people want to be. I would like to, well, first I'd like to say, you know, we had the same debate when we were talking about what happened with COVID in the airlines, and we're about to issue a report showing that the investment the government made and made quickly actually is going to pay the government back into the investment. So it was a COVID pandemic, and we had to make decisions about whether to keep a workforce and keep them running, and the U.S. approach to that worked. So here, it's kind of, all of you have touched on this in so many different ways. It is about future investment. That's why this hearing is about the advancement of next generation chips. It is about how does the United States keep its leadership in that. And as you all have noted, we've gone from 36% down to 12%, and the question remains, if we do nothing right now, where are we going to go? So I definitely believe in ecosystems. I believe in the manufacturing supply chain that exists for automotives and for aviation, and I certainly want a manufacturing supply chain and ecosystem to exist on something as essential as chip technology, given the information age. It is, you could say it's the ultimate supply chain, if you will. So the question on this graph here, you can see that the amount of U.S. leadership has continued to fall off as we go to those next generation chips. So this isn't just about how many chips you can produce or whether you can produce chips that were the last generation of chips. This is about producing the next generation of chips with the higher intelligence. That's why, I don't know, Mr. Gelsing, I really liked your detailed testimony about all the advancements that Intel is making. You know, the ribbon FET, the Power Via, the EUV, that's a partnership with a European company, ASML, and obviously Mr. Archer is talking about this as well as it relates to plasma. So this really envisioned, you are kind of like the ultimate story of translational science that we're trying to capture in the R&D bill. We're trying to tell our friends here and people in America that we've done a lot of basic research, we've done a lot of advanced research, but China is spending 80% of their dollars on commercialization. So this is about whether we take the next generation of technology and get it deployed faster and remain on the leading edge. And if we don't, then all that manufacturing is going to go somewhere else, not in the United States. And as we can see from what's just happened, I think Americans like woke up and understand intuitively what supply chain is all about now. They know exactly what that means. That means they don't get their product. And now if you tell them that the ultimate product of the supply chain, chips, is all now leading edge in a country, I mean, in the island of Taiwan, then you basically are sitting here with a big vulnerability of the United States. And I think the last events of several weeks make that even more poignant. So the question is, what is it that we need to keep doing to keep on the leading edge of this technology? So you gave us this, you gave us all these advancements in these chips, which I wish I could drill down on. But basically, you're talking about IP boost, you're talking about better connectivity, you're talking about more translation of. So from the first chip to today, what is the difference as far as what it means? And maybe I'll ask Mr. Feit what it means to him when it comes to the product that he's trying to deliver today. But could you just give us, Mr. Gelsinger or Mr. Murray, what kind of what are we talking about as far as advancements of chip capability? I mean, I believe in Moore's Law, but help people understand here. The first chip did X, and now here's where we are with this level of advancement.
Yeah, thank you. And, on my lapel here, I was the chief architect and designer of the 8486 chip for Intel, introduced in 1989. And this chip had 1.2 million transistors on it. Right, the most advanced server chip that I just put into your hands here as samples is on Intel 7, which is, your chart is now out of date. We're in production on our 7 nanometer products. This is 25 billion transistors, right? Which, just is mind-boggling, the progress that's been made. And as we think about application usages like in autonomous vehicles, the most advanced AI applications, right, vision detection and being predictive management of driving, the most advanced mRNA sequencing capabilities, speech recognition capabilities, the AI applications across numerous industries, 5 and 6G connectivity. All of these depend on the most advanced technologies available. They need the highest performance computing at the lowest power capabilities to process these most advanced algorithms. We predict that by the end of the decade, we will have our first trillion transistor chip. Right? And those kind of capabilities are for many of the immersive experiences of the future that will define the future competitiveness of industries globally.
Mr. Feit, what do you need, Mr. Feit, from them? What do you need them to keep doing that as it relates to next generation technology for your trucks and efficiencies?
Sure. I think Mr. Gelsinger spoke well on the high technology end of some of the needs we have for vehicles that are fully electric or zero emissions, using hydrogen fuel cells, or in autonomy where visual graphics are so important and machine learning is so important. We need high-end chips. But we also, as the industry, the agricultural, the automotive, the truck, many other industries, need some kind of, I'll call it more standard chips that keep affordability at the right level and performance at the right level to make all the cars, trucks, tractors that we need in this country. And so they shouldn't be left behind in that thinking. It can't have a life cycle of 2 to 3 years. Otherwise, the cost of products will go up incredibly if we're forced to redesign cars, trucks, and tractors, medical equipment that quickly. So it's kind of a both and, Senator Cantwell.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. My time has expired, but I think if Senator Thune isn't available, then I think it's Senator Moran.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and our witnesses today for joining us. According to a report issued by the Semiconductor Industry Association, less than 5% of the global manufacturing share for packaging, assembly, and testing is done onshore in the United States. We have companies certainly in Kansas and across the United States, I think, that are well-positioned, to increase the capacity alongside chip fabricators like Intel and Micron to address shortage issues for the automotive and other industries. I would ask all three of you, can you comment on the importance of having the CHIP Act investment address the post-fabrication or downstream part of the semiconductor supply chain to reduce the supply chain and security vulnerabilities?
Yeah, overall, the indications are exactly as you say. That package assembly test, which is generally more dependent on low labor cost, has even drifted more aggressively to Asia. We believe it's critical to restore the integrity of the entire supply chain, including advanced packaging assembly test on America, or at a minimum in North America. Pieces of the CHIPS Act specifically are designed in this area of advanced packaging capabilities. Our objective would be an entire reshoring of the complete supply chain, not only including package assembly test, but also many of the subcomponents, key minerals, et cetera, all being brought back to U.S. soils. We believe we need a geographically balanced, resilient supply chain for the future, starting with the fabs, the most important thing, but it must also comprehend the entire supply chain.
Anyone have anything to add to that?
Yes, I would add that, of course, leading edge investments in leading edge technology are the most important. Tremendous opportunity to innovate, to differentiate, and to really open up new applications. Of course, priority should be on leading-edge wafer manufacturing as part of CHIPS Act, as well as investment tax credits. Both are essential to ensure America's leadership in semiconductor R&D and manufacturing. But certainly, aspects of advanced packaging should also be emphasized as part of the overall development. I want to highlight here that why investment in leading-edge technology is so important. If we go back to Chair Cantwell's earlier question regarding importance of advancing technology, let me take you back to early 1990s when NAND technology was taken from the labs into high commercial production. Since then, the cost has come down of technology, advancement of technology by more than 10 million times. This is what has unleashed tremendous innovation that memory is today being used in data centers, to smartphones, to PCs, to consumer devices, to electric vehicles in the future, and to continue to unleash innovation, to continue to provide what technology has delivered and how it has become the backbone. Leading edge technology is really, really important. And as part of that, leading edge memory, which is what Micron, as the only company in the US, developing and manufacturing semiconductor memory here in the US, it's really important to emphasize this piece as we go forward to bring more leading edge memory technology onshore. And these investments, with the support from the government and CHIPS and investment tax credits, not only support specific companies and bringing manufacturing onshore, they create tens of thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs over a period of time as well.
Mr. Mrocha, thank you. I'm going to try to get a second question in. I heard that before I had to leave for a moment, I heard the importance of research. Where is the funding sources, federal funding sources that seem to be either available or missing? What's the natural kind of opportunity we have to support research in the United States to keep the technology at its latest advancements?
Yeah, generally, the research efforts are across, our academic communities. Largely, National Science Foundation and DARPA have been two sources of sustained government partnerships. We've seen the role of governments funding research to drop dramatically, right, into the semiconductor industry over the last several decades. And really, that was the seed corn, right, per my earlier testimony, that's enabled this industry to emerge. So we believe that those research dollars need to be those long-term material science, chemistry, creating the future, done largely through the academic institutions. The establishment of the National Semiconductor Technology Center in the CHIPS Act, as well as the advanced packaging technologies, are just great venues to reestablish that kind of focus for the future. Something that's well established in foreign efforts. We see those in Europe, we see those in Asia, and we've lost that focus in the US.
Mr. Gelsinger, I'm an appropriator for DARPA. I'm an appropriator for NSF. I'm the lead Republican in that regard. These issues matter to me, and just as an opportunity for you and others, we've increased the funding for research. Where it's being spent is not necessarily determined by us, but by those agencies.
Yeah.
But if there's opportunities that I can be of help, that our subcommittee can be of help to attract the attention necessary to the importance of research in this field, please reach out to me.
I would cherish the opportunity to spend more time with you on that topic.
Thank you.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we consider the $52 billion in taxpayers' money to subsidize the chip manufacturers, we can't ignore the environmental impact of this manufacturing. We need to obviously have a plan in order to deal with all of those issues so that we are ensuring that we reduce greenhouse gases, that we reduce carbon in the atmosphere. So my question would be, I know that Lam Research has committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. That's an important step, but it's not enough. You must get to net zero across all greenhouse gas emissions. And to the other witnesses, will you commit that your companies will reach net zero by 2050? Mr. Gelsinger.
Yeah, we will be shortly describing a detailed plan to accomplish net zero by 2040. And we're laying out a more aggressive plan to, be RE 100 in 2030, net zero by 2040. We've also been widely
Is
recognized.
that all greenhouse gases?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we've also been widely recognized as a company for our leadership work in areas like water reclamation, minimizing of hazardous gas and chemicals, as well as our overall efforts in sustainability, something we've received numerous awards for on a yearly basis now for many decades.
Great. So next, sir.
Micron has a strong program and emphasis.
Will you
on-
make that commitment? Will you make a commitment to reduce down to zero greenhouse gas emissions by?
In the long term, we absolutely will be getting there.
In the long term is which year?
We have a program in place regarding, and investments being made.
No, but which year are you,
We will soon be announcing that. We have not yet laid out the year, but we are making strong progress with respect to greenhouse gas reductions, waste management,
Right.
water recycling, as well as renewable energy usage.
right, which is admirable, but we need dates, we need commitments, and if.
We are absolutely
If Intel
aggressively-
can make these promises, we expect you to make the same promises. I
Absolutely.
just want to say that to you, and we're going to hold you to it, and you'll hear from us if you don't do that. This is a bargain, okay? We can do both at the same time. We can compete on the one end and also show the rest of the world that you can reduce greenhouse gases.
Senator Markey, I just want them to produce enough chips so we can electrify all our transportation sector right now is what I would hope. But I do agree, hold some goals out here, that's great.
Right. Well, they should be the model, okay? We can't expect the rest of the economy to be efficient if the industry that prides itself on providing the technology to make us efficient cannot do it, okay? So they should be able to square that up in terms of their own corporate agenda. And on to water usage, the production of semiconductors requires millions of gallons of water per day. Semiconductor companies' water usage is skyrocketing. Intel and Micron both use approximately 14 billion gallons of water in 2020. Chip manufacturers must work to restore water to their local water systems so that they are replacing the water they use with an equal amount of clean water. I want to acknowledge Intel for pledging to be net positive on water usage by 2030. Mr. Marotra, can you make the same commitment?
We actually in Boise, Idaho, have a program in place with 75% reduction in wastewater improvements with 75%. And we have absolutely programs in place. And I wanted to also highlight to you that we have made commitment to be investing over $1 billion over 5 to 7 years in programs related to sustainable operations. Again, related to all aspects, including water. Water recycling.
Can you commit to being net positive on water usage by 2030, Mr.?
So we, again, have timelines outlined in our reports that we publish on sustainability on an annual basis, and we are absolutely committed to continuing to make improvements in these areas.
Okay, well, there's an old saying, to those who much is given, much is expected. So a lot is going to be given to the industry by the Congress, and we have higher expectations for you to be the model. So we'll be looking very closely at the commitments that you are making, because it is critical that we solve the supply chain problems that are increasing prices and harming consumers, but we have to do it simultaneously while solving the climate crisis and ensuring that the environment is not collateral damage or just something that's an afterthought, and that's historically been the case. So we just want to let you know that we're—
And Senator, I want to highlight it is a priority for us. We publish a sustainability report on an annual basis. Our milestones and our goals are outlined there, and you will hear more about this in terms of specific goals coming from us and higher ambitious targets in this regard soon.
Okay, the sooner the better, and the higher the better. Okay, so we look with
We are aligned.
anticipation to your announcement.
We are aligned on these goals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Senator Scott.
First, I want to thank Chair Cantwell for hosting this important hearing. I want to thank each of you for being here. My background is I ran companies, I built companies, I started companies from scratch. And so I learned pretty early that if you didn't get a return on investment, you didn't do very well. Also, as a business person, you try to look at what's going on around the world. And one thing I would be focused on today, if I did business in communist China, is to look at what's happening in Russia right now, where the American public is furious with what's going on with Ukraine. We're expected, our American companies, to stop doing business with Russia. So if I was doing business with communist China today, I'd be concerned that that same thing will happen when communist China decides to invade Taiwan. So first, Mr. Gilzinger, I want to talk a little bit about Intel. The company is clearly doing well. You're one of the top 10 most profitable companies in America. You're the world's second largest semiconductor producer. And last year, you made $20 billion in income with a 25% profit margin. I think everybody in business in the world would be very proud of that. Those are great numbers. You also invested $25 billion across from your company last year, including some chip-making expansion. Thank you for your expansion. We should have been in Florida, but your expansion in Arizona and Ohio. So I'm a business guy. I like the fact people are investing. When speaking about billions of dollars Intel's new in capital investments last year, you said, quote, "It does not depend on a penny of government support or state support or any other investments to make it successful. We're making these commitments without any commitments from the governments to accelerate them," unquote. What's interesting is you've completely changed your tune recently. You're also quoted as saying, let's not waste this crisis in regard to receiving taxpayer handouts, which should scare all of us. This is on top of your company apologizing to Communist China for the U.S. sanctions on the Xinjiang region, where the Chinese government is committing genocide on the Uyghur people. Look, I'm a business guy. I've heard countless pitches for capital. Here's my question for you. Number one, I feel like we're fiduciaries for the American taxpayer. They give us their dollars. They want to make sure those dollars are spent well. So tell me how, if we put all this money in, and my understanding, your company will get $4 billion. If we put all this money in, how does the American taxpayer get a return? On top of this, why wouldn't you, as a CEO of a company doing significant business in China, be scared to death of what's going on now with whether it's the Uyghurs, stealing the basic rights of Hong Kong citizens, harvesting organs of prisoners, and then you watch what's happened in Russia, knowing that American public is going to be furious with a company that still does business with Communist China if they continue to do those atrocities and then invest in Taiwan. So give me your pitch about why, as American taxpayer, we get a return, and two, why your company isn't putting even more money into America and other allies to get away from Communist China.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Thank you, Senator Scott, for those thoughts. First, I want to emphasize that we're putting our chips on the table. I've lowered our profitability by 600 basis points this year. I've made the company free cash flow negative for the first time in 3 decades. I've doubled our capital investments, all to the howls of Wall Street. We are investing heavily in rebuilding Intel, but American leadership in this critical industry. I want to go bigger and faster. That's what the CHIPS Act will enable us to do, go bigger and faster and invest for the long term.
Let's go to the return for a taxpayer. We're all fiduciaries for taxpayers. I'm glad that Intel's doing this. It sounds like it'll be a great investment for Intel, getting a bunch of federal money. Tell me how I get a return for an American taxpayer.
These are extraordinary industries that are leveraged across every other industry. Every job we create creates, on average, greater than 10 other jobs. The work that we've done in Arizona and Oregon, as you know, and Senator Wyden was here.
Excuse me. You have a report that shows me that think about it. I'm a fiduciary for taxpayers.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's going to create 10 more jobs for every...
On average, it's been well publicized in our sites in Oregon, in Arizona. It's what was put forward for the investments around Ohio. These are incredibly leveraged
But that's great.
industries.
How's that turn into cash for the American taxpayer?
Right, creating jobs across the supply chain, in manufacturing, in construction. Our Ohio site is creating 3,000 new jobs, 7,000 new construction jobs.
How much money does the American taxpayer get? You're asking for $4 billion for your company. What return does the American taxpayer get for that? How much? So you invest these dollars, you're going to make money, I assume. You're not doing it if you didn't make money. How does an American taxpayer get a return?
These jobs would drift to other areas. We want them on American soil. They create jobs that are tax-paying great jobs. And we're happy to go into more detail with you, Senator Scott, right, on all of the reports and data that we've done. But these are seen as some of the most lucrative, job-creating, tax-producing, industry and community-creating jobs in America.
Okay, let me just finish that. So I'm a CEO. I ran companies. We had to get a return. We had to pay our banks back. We had to get a return for our shareholders. As governor of Florida, we did probably 1,000 economic development deals. I could tell you I got on average 10 times my money back. So it sounds really nice, but I've never seen one report that says I'll ever get a dime back if you get $4 billion.
Well, every dollar.
Senator Scott, I think we got to move to our next witness, but in this, I'm just looking at the written testimony. So I guess you could say that is a submission to Congress in Intel's written testimony. California annual economic impact from Intel is $24.9 billion. Oregon is $19.3 billion in annual impact. Arizona is $8.6 billion in annual impact. So New Mexico is $1.2 billion in annual impact. Texas doesn't have the exact number there, and Massachusetts. So I think the issue is $52 billion from us, and we have a long way to go in this process, but I think you're going to see that it is about building that ecosystem, and I do think you'll see annual revenues that will, I think the clarification to Mr. Gelsinger's statement was that they're going to Ohio no matter what and building. The question is, could they expedite and build more? And if CHIPS passes, they're likely to do that acceleration. So anyway, Senator Klobuchar.
Very good. Thank you very much, Chair Cantwell, and thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you to all of you. It's a nice break from judiciary, honestly. There's just a little thing going on in the other hearing room. I wanted to start with you, Mr. Gelsinger, and Mr. Archer, on the subject of workforce shortage. I'm obsessed with this. My state has a really low unemployment rate, which is a great problem to have. And we have 18 Fortune 500 companies, somewhere in that range. And I believe the answers are broad. The answers are, of course, immigration reform, lifting visa caps, workforce permits, but also apprenticeships and 1- and 2-year degrees. And Senator Moran and I have a bill which was included actually in the America Competes Act over in the House, which would allow workers to earn college credit for completed apprenticeships, creating a pathway for workers to gain skills. Can you talk to the role of public-private sectors working together on this angle of workforce shortages?
Yeah, we're extremely proud to be partnering. And in fact, just last week, we announced a $100 million partnership with NSF for job creation, primarily in the Midwest, around our Ohio site announcement. This builds on a long history of public-private partnership and job creation. We're making strong advancements in areas like underrepresented minorities and females in technology, strong investments in STEM. I personally am a product of the community college system, a farm boy from Pennsylvania who's now leading one of the most iconic companies in American history. I deeply believe in these principles. We've also seen that we've launched our AI for the Future program, specifically aimed at community colleges. Many of our workforce are hired, with no or minimal technology education, and we provide that in partnership with many of the local community colleges as well. This is core to our future.
Okay, thank you. My dad went to community college, as did my sister, so thank you. Mr. Archer, quickly, because I have another question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, I think as Mr. Gelsinger said, it's important to the industry. When we think about chip shortage and many of the bottlenecks to recovering from this, one of them is the tight labor market that we face today, not only in companies like Lam Research, but also in the hundreds of American suppliers that we depend on. And those suppliers are spread across 37 different states, and they're feeling the pain of not enough workers to fill these high-skilled jobs. So we're very supportive of any type of government program that helps to bolster.
And immigration reform.
And immigration reform.
Okay,
of course, that is
good.
Important for us in California as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Mehrotra, I know Micron employs 110 people in Minnesota who design chips. Thank you for that. not who's counting, but I am. I also visited Skywater in Bloomington, Minnesota. In fact, the president at one point held up one of our Minnesota chips, which produces 65 and 90 nanometer chips. Can you talk about the importance of investing in US-based companies in the production of semiconductors and innovation?
Senator, I would like to say we are very proud of our team in Minnesota. They're absolutely working.
Just put say that again in the microphone. Yeah, that's good. There
It
we
is
go.
on.
Yeah.
I just want to say again that we are very proud of our team in Minnesota. They are absolutely leading edge engineers working on some of the most advanced work that Micron is doing. And Micron today is leading the world in semiconductor memory and storage technologies. And it's really imperative, as part of Micron's announcement of investing more than $150 billion over a decade in leading-edge semiconductor manufacturing and R&D, that we have the opportunity to bring manufacturing, leading-edge memory manufacturing onshore. Of course, we are here in Manassas, Virginia, manufacturing with nearly 2,000 team members and investing in advanced memory manufacturing and storage and supplying the markets such as automotive market, defense, and industrial. But we need to bring more manufacturing into the US, and Micron is committed to doing it with support from CHIPS Act and investment tax credits. As the only company in the US making semiconductor memory and storage, we fully recognize our responsibility and we seek the support from the government policies to enable us to be able to be part of building resilient semiconductor leadership here in the US.
Okay, well, thank you. And I will just put on the record a question about Senator Thune's and my Shipping Reform Act. I think it's really important if we're going to make stuff and invent things and export to the rest of the world, that you're able to ship to the rest of the world, which means not having empty containers go out in those ships and having reasonable rates. And so we're excited under Senator Cantwell and Senator Wicker's leadership that the bill was marked up and unanimously got through this committee just a few days ago and is headed to the Senate floor. So thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you. Senator Thune, good follow-on to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. And let me just start by saying that the United States remains a world leader in technology and innovation. It's the birthplace of industries that feed the nation's economic dynamism and benefit the lives of Americans and people across the world. It is essential that we should ensure our supply chains continue to innovate as well, providing them with the agility to respond to advances in technology or disruptive events like the COVID-19 pandemic or Russia's war in Ukraine, which is why I've worked in a bipartisan manner, as Senator Klobuchar mentioned, with her and Senator Wicker on legislative solutions like the Ocean Shipping Reform Act and the Freight Act to ease current strains and to bolster the global competitiveness of U.S. products and industries. The effects of the semiconductor shortage highlight the importance of supply chains, perhaps most notably in the nation's auto industry, which produces more than 11 million vehicles annually. The transformation to automated vehicles, or AVs, is going to place a much greater demand on semiconductors and other crucial products, so it's crucial that the United States remain globally competitive in this space. AVs will radically transform the way Americans move. It's especially true for the elderly and persons with disabilities whose current transportation options are limited, especially in rural areas. Moreover, it has potential to greatly reduce the average of more than 40,000 traffic fatalities on our nation's roadways each year. While American companies currently lead the world in AV technology, the advantage cannot be taken for granted. In allowing China to seize the mantle of innovation is unacceptable, and the U.S. must act boldly to maintain its position. The U.S. regulatory framework and our supply chains must catch up with private sector innovation in order for these technologies to advance. There are tens of thousands of good-paying jobs and billions of dollars in investment that are at stake, which is why my colleague Senator Peters and I have worked together for the better part of 5 years to develop and enact AV legislation, a crucial component in maintaining U.S. leadership in this emerging industry. AVs have the potential to once again transform the way Americans move, and the U.S. must once again lead the world in this transportation revolution. Mr. Fight In your testimony, you mentioned engineering and innovation centers working toward the development of autonomous and connected vehicles. Beyond bolstering U.S. technological competitiveness through investments in supply chains and domestic industries, what do you believe Congress or the Department of Transportation can do to encourage the testing and deployment of AVs?
Well, first of all, Senator Thune, thanks for the comments. I think you're right on with the opportunities of what AVs can bring to our country and the world. And I think that it's nice that we're in America, the leader in the technology, and as PACCAR, that we're partnered with leaders in the technology, with Aurora, with Waymo, Kodiak, Embark, and others in our development efforts. So I think that what we really need is the clear vision of what will be allowed from a legislative standpoint, and then we're going to need to clarify what the judicial requirements are going to be in terms of liabilities as we move forward. Right now, the industry is in a really good spot in developing level 4 autonomy, and we're moving it forward. It needs to be done safely. That's the most important thing, right? Safety has to be the most critical factor, and we'll continue to focus that way. And then we'll develop capability over a period of time when it's safe in certain corridors, and those corridors need to be clearly identified. And then we just need to have a general knowledge sharing between government and industry on how we make sure that we roll this out in an effective way. So I think it's a dynamic conversation that we are happy to engage with on an ongoing basis.
Thanks. Mr. Gelsinger, given Intel's work in this space, do you have anything to add on promoting the domestic development of AVs?
Yeah, clearly this is an area that the world is moving rapidly. We find some of the regulatory policies in other parts of the world are more favorable now, and some of those nations are moving ahead more rapidly. So we do believe this is an area that requires much more active positioning. Our Mobileye division is one of the clear leaders in the world in this area, and right now we're seeing far more progress at other portions of the world in deploying AV vehicles for both commercial fleets as well as consumer fleets. Much of the technology is being developed here, but the deployment is actually being led at other places in the world. Time to act. This is urgent if we want to stay ahead. And I'd also emphasize that AV is one of the most advanced uses of AI capabilities, requiring the most advanced semiconductor technologies as well. So it reinforces the heart of this hearing today. We need the most advanced semiconductors. Today, the auto is about 4% semiconductors. It's estimated to be 20% semiconductors, 5x increase by the end of the decade. So the dependency on semiconductors for these advanced areas like AV is absolutely essential for the auto and trucking and transportation industry of the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My time's expired. I've got a question on 5G that I will submit for the record, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thune. I saw Senator Tester earlier. He would be next if he's available. If not, we will go to Senator Baldwin. I think Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And like my colleague, Senator Klobuchar, I've been jumping between committees, so it looks like I missed a show and tell at the beginning, but I'll wait till after the hearing to catch up on that. I also want to chime in along with my colleagues about restoring American leadership in semiconductor manufacturing, that Wisconsin would make an ideal location for some of that expansion, just planting that seed. But as we're well aware, right now, Congress is on the brink of putting together a conference committee to advance the variously named competition bill. And I hope that we will do our jobs without delay. But during the debate over the CHIPS Act, many pointed out the generous incentives provided by foreign governments to domestic manufacturers. However, few have noted the different spending priorities of foreign competitors, particularly on the issue of stock buybacks. For example, over the last 20 years, looking that time horizon, Intel spent about 64% of its net income on buybacks, a whopping $127 billion, while Samsung spent only 10% and Taiwan Semiconductor spent 2%. So as a supporter of the CHIPS Act, I want to ensure that the federal government gets a proper return on its investment, namely an increase in the domestic semiconductor manufacturing base. And as such, I'd like to ask each of the semiconductor manufacturer witnesses to briefly describe your spending plans for the next few years and explain how you envision CHIPS funding potentially fitting into them. And if I could start with Intel, Mr. Gelsinger.
Thank you. I came to the role as CEO slightly over a year ago. I ceased our buyback policy immediately upon my arrival. I laid out to Wall Street a radical increase in our capital expenditures, more than doubling them, taking the free cash flow of Intel negative for the first time in over 3 decades, reducing our profitability by 600 basis points, more than doubling our long-term capital investments, and indicating to the street that I expected to see that level only increase for the rest of the decade. This is the largest capital build-out probably done by any company in any industry in history. The majority of that will land on American soil. But I do not believe that's enough, and I can't do it myself. The CHIPS Act is intended, from my perspective, to enable me to go bigger and faster than the bold commitments that we have already made that have reached very negative response from Wall Street. We want to do more and faster. This is all about restoring U.S. competitive, bringing back this mantle from Asia on a critical industry, not only for our economy, but also our national security. We're all in.
Thank you. Mr. Murata.
Senator Baldwin, as I highlighted earlier, Micron is the only company in the US that manufactures semiconductor memory and storage. And semiconductor memory and storage represents nearly 60% of the worldwide wafer production. And we are the only company here manufacturing and developing leading-edge technologies. Today, we are the global leader in technology for DRAM and NAND ahead of all other global competitors in developing that technology and putting it into production. We have done so by making billions and billions and tens of billions, more than that, investments over the course of last few years in leading edge R&D and investments in manufacturing. We'll always prioritize our investments in R&D and manufacturing to be able to secure leadership for Micron in semiconductor memory technology and to be able to meet the growing needs in this world of data economy for more data solutions, which we make, memory and storage solutions. So that will always be our highest priority. As part of that, we have announced in October of last year that over the decade, we will be investing more than $150 billion in leading-edge R&D and manufacturing. So that is the priority, to continue to drive innovation, to continue to invest in R&D, to continue to support the manufacturing. That's our plan, and that's our focus.
And Mr. Archer.
Yes, so Senator Baldwin, we manufacture the machines that are used to make the chips. And so our priorities for the future are the same as they've been the last couple of years, which is to expand our capacity. Nearly 70% of our manufacturing capacity is in the U.S. We spend about 90% of our R&D in the U.S. Last year was of $1.5 billion. Our priorities for the future are just to continue to invest to accelerate innovation in support of the domestic and global semiconductor manufacturing industry in order to try to alleviate many of the global shortages that we've seen in chips that are affecting so many different industries. And so we're going to just continue to invest to maintain our leadership in this space.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chairman. Whenever I'm back in Georgia, I hear about the rising costs for families, and I'm deeply alarmed by how the global semiconductor shortage is behind many of those rising costs in the automobile industry. We've seen costs increase for new cars by 11%, 37% for used cars. Almost everything relies on semiconductors, not just cars, but cell phones, washing machines, which means that due to this chip shortage, families have faced sharp increases in the cost of computers and cell phones, which they need for work and school and many other products. Mr. Gelsinger, yes or no, do you agree that the semiconductor shortage has likely contributed, at least in part, to higher prices of things that families rely on, like cars, computers, and washing machines.
Yes, I agree.
In fact, rising costs don't just hurt car buyers. Thousands of workers, like those at the Kia plant in West Point, Georgia, which had to shut down a couple of times, have been affected by the shortage. And that's why last May I proudly supported federal funds to increase domestic semiconductor production. I was proud to work with Senator Peterson on that issue when the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act went through committee this last May. And I supported it again when the House recently passed the America Competes legislation. Mr. Gelsinger, do you also agree that providing additional resources to the Chips for America Fund would help alleviate the semiconductor shortage?
Yes, I believe it would. It takes time to build new factories. So, the urgency associated with this is critical, but unquestionably, this will help to alleviate the shortages, mostly in the medium and longer term, but immediately helping is a very positive step. We've already wasted several quarters since the Senate acted last year, and now it's time for us to move forward rapidly.
I agree. I think it's past time and that Congress move immediately and pass this funding that the President needs to sign into law. Now, related to the semiconductor issue, America, of course, needs a robust semiconductor workforce that reflects the diversity of the nation. As Congress makes investments in domestic semiconductor manufacturing, we must make sure that we have the benefit of all of our talent, that we ensure that businesses are doing what they can to make semiconductor jobs more accessible and attract partners from underrepresented communities. I'm a graduate of an HBCU, I'd argue the greatest of all, Morehouse College. But I've long been a champion for all of our HBCUs, which have been punching way above their weight, doing so much for so many for so long with so very little resources. I'm proud to have fought for $1.2 billion in funding in the recent competition package to support research capacity building at HBCUs and MSIs, including for semiconductor-related research. And I also recently sent a letter with Senator Padilla supporting a provision in the America Competes Act that would create an Office of Opportunity and Inclusion at the Department of Commerce to develop standards that will help expand opportunities in the semiconductor industry for traditionally underrepresented individuals. So I want to ask each of you, as industry leaders, would an Office of Opportunity and Inclusion support the semiconductor industry's efforts to attract more women, more people of color, and rural workers, and do you see this as essential to the work? Mr. Gelsinger?
Yeah, I would say whether we have the office or not, we are deeply committed to these topics. We've been increasing our underrepresented minorities and our female workforce. We've set a goal to have 40% females by 2030. Part of my selection of Ohio, right, and our recent education initiatives that we just announced last week for a $100 million investment were specifically because of increasing our minority and female workforce. We would love to discuss this topic with you more deeply.
But do you think having an office might encourage others similarly positioned to make a similar commitment?
It certainly could, and we'd look forward to that conversation with you.
Thank you. Mr. Mehrotra, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't butcher your name.
No, you didn't. Thank you. Senator, we are well aware of your and Senator Padilla's letter regarding Office of Opportunity and Inclusion in the Commerce Department. I would like to highlight that Micron has been a strong proponent. It's a core value of Micron to promote greater diversity and to increase representation of minorities within Micron. We publish a diversity and inclusion report. We call it For All every year, and this report highlights our key initiatives in terms of increasing representation across all diverse groups, in terms of pay equity, not only in terms of gender pay equity, but pay equity not only for salary, but for bonuses and stocks for all underrepresented groups in the community, focus on engaging with minority-based suppliers as well. So we have, and putting our cash, investing it with those that represent minority institutions in terms of financial institutions. So we have several initiatives. We report our progress. Our values are very much aligned with promoting greater opportunity and inclusion, and we continue to be strong
So you would support such an office, and you are pledging your own commitment to make sure that people of color and women are represented and provided access to employment opportunities. Mr. Archer?
Yes, also at Lam Research, this is an incredibly important topic, and therefore we're supportive of any activities that can help us expand the workforce in the United States, including tapping into diverse work groups. One of the things that we're most proud of is we partner with organizations like the National GEM Consortium, which has members, many of which are the HBCUs. And what we promote is trying to help students pursue advanced degrees, masters and PhDs in science and engineering, so that they can build meaningful and long-lasting careers in companies like ours and others throughout the semiconductor industry.
Thank you all so much. I look forward to working with industry leaders to increase semiconductor production in our own country and that we make good use of all of our talent.
And Senator, I just wanted to highlight to you that we recently opened a center in Atlanta, Georgia, and we are engaged with HBCUs there as well. And the purpose of this design center that we have opened there, where we'll be recruiting 500 engineers over the course of next few years, is really to, again, tap into outstanding, diverse talent that exists in the region.
Thank you so much.
I don't see Senator Fisher or Young. I know Senator Young said he was coming back, but we'll just keep going on our side. Senator Peters.
Well, thank you, Chair Cantwell, and thank you for convening this incredibly important hearing, and great to have the witnesses here as well. As we see on our desk here, these semiconductor chips can be as small as a fingernail, but we know that these tiny devices have absolutely enormous impact across the economy and our society. And certainly a clear example is the auto industry, something I'm very close to as a senator representing the great state of Michigan. And I know that before the 1970s, cars simply didn't have any chips, and very few then started having a handful of chips to deal with just kind of the engine functions and make that work a little smoother. And then in a few years later, cars relied on chips for just about everything, from safety devices to things like power windows. Instead of that crank there, it's a chip that allows us to do that. They've basically become ubiquitous, and some cars or vehicles now have over 1,000 chips in them. And in light of this trend, it's no surprise that the pandemic contributed to a global chip shortage. And when that happened, it hurt auto production and auto workers particularly hard. As we look to the future, chips are going to play an even more important role in mobility, as they are essential, as I think was discussed earlier, for both electric vehicles as well as autonomous vehicles, which represents the future for the auto industry. That's why I'm excited to chair a hearing in Detroit this coming Monday, and we're going to examine the role of semiconductors in the future of automotive innovation. And I certainly believe it's essential that we make our semiconductor supply chains as resilient as possible, not just efficient, but highly resilient. And I think my state of Michigan is particularly well positioned to lead this effort. Not only will this grow jobs and economic activity in the semiconductor industry, it'll also strengthen the entire economy, especially when it comes to not just cars, but all products that use these chips. So, Mr. Mehrotra, as you know, and as you've mentioned, cars are becoming increasingly electric and autonomous, and Michigan is certainly leading the way in the manufacture of these vehicles. But automakers in Michigan are also going to require more and sophisticated semiconductor chips as we move forward, not just the legacy chips we have now, particularly when it comes to memory and to storage. Indeed, you described vehicles earlier as a future data center on wheels, which is basically clearly what they are now and will increasingly be. This is just one reason why I expect that Michigan is going to be a significant player. We're a major manufacturing state, home to many other industries that see their products more integrated with chips, from medical devices to defense applications. Michigan's future with the semiconductor industry is also rooted in world-class universities and training programs which prepare workers for these roles, as was discussed earlier, from R&D to making cutting-edge products. Simply put, another plug for my state, Michigan knows how to make things, so it's no surprise we're seeing a major influx of investment around semiconductor technologies, like KLA operating its second headquarters in Ann Arbor, and without a doubt in my mind, funding for the CHIPS Act will be critical for growing this forward. So my question for you is, Mr. Mrocha, can you discuss how Micron's memory and storage technologies will play a role in electric and autonomous cars of the future, as well as all of the other products we make in our manufacturing state?
Senator Peters, thank you for your question and giving me the opportunity to highlight here that in semiconductor memory and storage, Micron has globally #1 market share. So we have been strong partners to supplying to the automotive industry globally and strong partners to the US auto manufacturers. And during the pandemic, with various semiconductor supply chain shortages, we worked closely with automakers and made sure, pleased to say, that our memory and storage solutions did not cause any line down situations, and we continued to be a strong provider of our solutions to them and will continue to maintain our #1 market share leadership in this very important and fast-growing segment for the semiconductor industry. And we have earned this #1 market share based on the high quality that Micron is focused on delivering to this industry, but also high quality that is focused on delivering solutions, whether in data center or intelligent edge or multitude of user devices that are using more and more memory and storage. You're absolutely right to point out that I often say that autonomous vehicles are becoming data center on wheels. Today, they have a roadmap that will be using more than $750 of semiconductor memory and storage content in these vehicles, more than 15 times higher than the standard vehicles of the past. So this is a tremendous opportunity, and Micron's focus on leading-edge technology is important. We are continuing to work with automakers to help them transition to the newer technology nodes faster, because that increases the availability of memory supply, and in general, moving faster to leading-edge nodes help increase the availability of all semiconductors and avoid the kind of shortages and situations that have occurred in the past. So this is an important initiative. The partnership with the auto industry is important, and of course, making investments here in the US with the support of not only just the CHIPS Act, but also with the investment tax credits is critically important, and Micron is looking forward to having these legislations get across the finish line so that with a sense of urgency, we can begin to play catch up in terms of bringing leading edge memory manufacturing onshore and play catch up with Asia, which has been investing for the last 20 years plus heavily with the government support in bringing their semiconductor manufacturing onshore.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. And I want to say, as a former computer programmer, when I started, those disk drives were called platters. They were giant. We had giant rooms that had to be cooled. Everything was big. And now, look, it's small. There's things even smaller than this. It's amazing. It's lighter, cooler, faster, and more powerful. So thank you for bringing those. And I really want to talk about the semiconductor impact on broadband, because the shortage has far-reaching consequences across sectors, particularly broadband. They're an essential part of all telecommunications network. Our consumer, our business equipment, our modems, our routers, our gateways, our devices, everything depend on the chips to manage it, to control it, to collect our information, divert information, store it, whatever that is. And The telecommunications industry has been sounding the alarm on shortages' impact on deployment, particularly of our broadband across the country. And I was a member of that group of 22 senators who helped draft the infrastructure bill, including the state broadband grant program, the Middle Mile Deployment Act. And I know that these programs will provide critical funding to state and localities for reliable, high-speed internet to the last mile, really our rural areas being the frontier rural areas in Nevada being really adversely impacted. So, Mr. Gelsinger, can you talk about the impact the semiconductor supply chain issues and shortages that they've had on the telecommunications industry? And how are the current semiconductor supply chain delays, how do you think they may impact the federal broadband programs, particularly those ones we just created with the bipartisan infrastructure law?
Thank you. And, first, I'd also want to point out that just 3 years ago, we were desperately fearful if we would have lost control of the technologies associated with our 5G networks. Today, technologies such as Open RAN or Open Radio Access Network are now opening up the 5G networks. And in fact, Dish, Verizon, AT&T, Rakuten are all building those on Intel-based Open RAN platforms. We have solved this international crisis that faced us in a technology lean-forward way. Also, the period of COVID has shown the criticality that we have on our broadband networks. Literally overnight, right, every worker and every school child became an online, right, student or worker, right? It was tremendous, and thus the efforts around building the broadband future, right, are absolutely essential, and we've seen the productivity benefits that result as we've come roaring out of the COVID economic challenges. That said, the future is still in front of us, and as we look to 5, 6G, deployments of autonomous vehicles, not just smart cities, but also smart factories with areas like private 5G and 6G, they depend on the most advanced semiconductor technologies. So what we're laying out here is literally the underlayment that's required to keep the U.S. competitive on the next generation communications and broadband technologies. This is essential to every aspect of the innovations that we're working on for the future, whether that's autonomous, whether that's private and consumers, whether that's factories and workers, and literally to be the unquestioned leader at 6G and beyond. This will be supported as a result of the CHIPS Act.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned this because we have a lot of sectors that depend on it. And so I want to talk about, moving on, Mr. Gelsinger, also about our tourism industry. Because as the witnesses, as many people have asked about autonomous cars, or just cars in general, a huge chip shortage, the increased demand for rental cars. As tourism boosts back up, we know that rental cars were sold off during the pandemic. New cars aren't being made as quickly. And of course, the demand is for individuals to buy cars. So it's really, really hurting tourist economies like Las Vegas. And so can you discuss the steps you're taking to ensure that chips are being manufactured and distributed to automakers in a manner that supports both industries critical to supporting tourism, such as our car rental companies, and I would say buses and all of those shuttle buses, vans, taxis, all those things that help our tourist economy in every state?
Yeah, as we've already indicated in this hearing so far, the importance of future technologies enables the cars of autonomous, connected, infotainment, all of those aspects. But the near-term crisis has been driven more by older nodes, areas that, many of which has further emphasize the gaps that we have in our gross dependence on Asian suppliers. We've recently announced the acquisition of a company, Tower Semiconductors, that increases our ability to respond to these near-term challenges of the auto industry. Our priorities and the allocation of our chips have been to, first, the manufacturers of semiconductor equipment, help us fish for the future. Second, to the healthcare sector. And third, to the auto sector. We view those as the most critical sectors to rebuild our future, and we'll continue to act in that way as we look to the future.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Young, you would be next if you want to go, and then Senator Hickenlooper. Apparently, that's a yes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Well, I appreciate, Madam Chair, you holding this timely hearing. It was nearly a year ago that this committee passed my Endless Frontier Act, now known as the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, and we did it with a bipartisan vote of 24-4 out of this committee. The bill is vitally important to the future of our country. There's a national security imperative to advancing this legislation to make sure that we don't fall behind China as it relates to our tech innovation. This, of course, is historically a key driver of our economic growth and our ability to defend our values, our way of life. American leadership in science and technology, especially the emerging technologies that are going to dominate the 21st century, will be key drivers of our economy and our competitiveness with Communist China moving forward. Key features of this legislation are the establishment of a new tech directorate, regional tech hubs across the heartland, so we can harness the potential and the creativity and the work ethic of our individuals, and of course the CHIPS Act, which will ensure that our economy is more resilient moving forward. As I understand, at this moment, the U.S. Senate is taking a vote to move us one step closer to ultimately passing USICA, or whatever we're calling the final work product. And I really look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues to see this across the finish line. In order to drive U.S. semiconductor innovation, we mustn't only incentivize growth in the U.S., as USICA and the CHIPS Act aim to do, but it's also imperative that we reduce our reliance on other countries throughout the entire supply chain. Mr. Gelsinger and Mr. Merorta, I'm sorry, I butchered your name there. I couldn't help but notice in your written testimonies that neither of you mentioned China, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to a couple of questions. What is the current state of the semiconductor industry with regards to China, and where do you see the industry's future in China? Mr. Gelsinger.
Yeah, China has emphasized the development of this sector on Chinese soil very significantly. It's been part of every 5-year plan in China for the last 2.5 decades of this priority area. And they have made substantial progress in building up their semiconductor industry. However, given our export license control matters, they're significantly behind. Their position is largely in older nodes and older industries, not on leading edge technologies, where U.S. and European capabilities are still far more advanced and other Asian countries are advanced. And thus, we believe that such practices for the future are important to continue the leadership that we have, to be very, very thoughtful about being able to sell products there so that we're maximizing the position of our product revenue, but to continue to keep a substantial technology leadership for our equipment suppliers as well as our chip suppliers to be able to have revenues there. It's the largest chip market in the world in China, so we need to be able to participate to become the largest companies in the world, even as we be very careful to protect our intellectual property and leadership position.
Sure. Mr. Merorta, do you have anything to add, sir?
I would just add that as China is one of the large markets, it is a large market not only due to Chinese companies using semiconductor products, but it is a large market due to many global businesses operating there and manufacturers such as Micron supplying product to them in China as well. So the China market does help provide scale that is important for semiconductor industry. The benefit of scale ultimately goes into investments in R&D. I would also add, as has been highlighted here earlier as well, that China certainly is very much recognizing the importance of semiconductors, certainly recognizes the importance of memory semiconductors, which Micron is the only company in the US making those, and is investing more than $100 billion supporting their semiconductor industry. And hence, it is extremely important that US does play catch-up with CHIPS Act, with investment tax credits, and timing is of the essence. Other countries are moving forward. We need to catch up in this area to get a level playing field. And as part of level playing field, of course, other aspects of free market access, fair trade policies, protection of intellectual property, these are all aspects that are clearly important as well.
Which is why we're advocating for this USICA legislation. So thank you for affirming that. And lastly, maybe very briefly, because my time's coming to an end, but do any of our panelists have concerns with our reliance on other countries for the rare earth mineral inputs that are used in semiconductor production?
The requirements are fairly modest on rare earths. Other areas like batteries and some of those are much more significant. That said, we believe we need resilience in the supply chain, and this deserves a lot more investigation. As we say, build the fabs, restore the supply chain, and work through all of the other elements that would feed that supply chain. That's the formula for our long-term success.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator well, I should say thank you, Senator Young, thank you and Senator Schumer for the two of your leadership on the underlying U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, and appreciate all your hard work in shepherding this through the process and your attention to coming back here today and adding that issue. Senator Young has been very concerned all along about the China impact of this, so appreciate his comments. Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to thank each of you for your time today and for your careers. Most Americans look at these chips as some combination of machines and magic. And I think that's the consequence of whole careers dedicated to innovation and constantly trying to find a better way to do it. Let me start with Mr. Gelsinger. I appreciate the recent announcement about the plant in Ohio. I think the CHIPS Act is going to create a number of construction, research, and manufacturing jobs all across the United States. I serve as chairman of the Space and Science Subcommittee of this committee. I also chair the Employment and Workplace Safety Subcommittee of the HELP Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. And that subcommittee has jurisdiction over workplace education and training. And I guess I've spent a lot of time looking as we go into this great transition into clean energy. We're also going into a great transition of what a job means and how people are going to be trained. I think that the workforce development that's required to navigate this great transition is going to be prodigious. Some estimates for skilled STEM workforce needed to manufacture chips ranges from anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 workers by 2025. So in your view, how do we help workers from relevant manufacturing fields upskill and reskill to satisfy those needs?
Yeah, and we believe that this is a critical topic, one that there are aspects of the CHIPS Act that are specifically designed to address, but clearly this is an area for public-private partnerships at scale. Just last week, we announced a $100 million initiative, right, around our Ohio plant, specifically in this area, right, across the skills, from community colleges and, the most basic entry-level manufacturing, from focus on K through 12, STEAM and STEM educational programs, reaching into, communities that haven't necessarily been affected, such as underrepresented minorities. The position of females in the workplace, particularly in tech fields, has been unacceptable. So these would be some of the examples of what those programs need to address. We also believe strongly that we need the best and the brightest. Right, and with that, our higher education workforce, over 50% of U.S. STEM, universities are foreign nationals, right? And I believe that every one of those should get a green card stapled to their diplomas when they graduate from a higher level institution in America. We want the best and brightest, right, in the U.S. Taken together, this will be a challenging endeavor, right? And I look forward to digging into this more thoroughly with you, as well as the efforts that are part of the CHIPS Act more broadly, work across the spectrum, and we're pretty proud of our reputation in this area, but we know it's not nearly enough.
Well, you're describing it, even if everything goes right, and we get immigration right, and we begin to do a better job of apprenticeship to get the kids in, especially young women, people of color, everything goes right, we're going to be pressed. So I appreciate your answer there, Mr. Mehrotra, and actually, Mr. Gelsinger, you can answer this as well. The U.S. decline in global chip manufacturing is already been well documented. Obviously, foreign subsidies and incentives are what we've been hearing about. They've taken chip manufacturing and assembly, even many of the design activities now we see more of that being done overseas. And I appreciate today's discussion on the importance of the CHIPS Act and the FABS Act, both of which I support strongly. But Mr. Mehrotra, would you discuss the role of other factors, and you touched on this a few minutes ago, but as, for instance, trade policies that will play in the domestic semiconductor industry's rebalancing?
So I think, again, it is important that we have a level playing field here in the US with respect to our global competitors, and level playing field certainly is intended to be achieved with the start of CHIPS funding, $52 billion funding, as well as with the support of investment tax credits. Those are important initiatives to play catch-up. Of course, policies related to our workforce development, what you just discussed, are going to be extremely important in terms of driving public and private sector partnerships. And then I think it's definitely important that we have policies that drive greater free trade, open markets, and absolutely level playing field in terms of IP protection and partnership with those around the world who do share those same values with us.
Perfect. Anything you want to add, either Mr. Archer or Mr. Gelsinger, or either one?
No, I think many of the things that you talked about, very important. Just last year, in the last 2 years, Lam Research, we've added more than 3,500 jobs in the U.S. We and our American suppliers are really feeling the pains of this tight labor market. And so, again, anything that can be done to help expand the skilled workforce, everything from manufacturing workers all the way to the most advanced researchers, is very welcome. And some elements of this legislation certainly are very supportive of that.
Great. Thank you each. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Hickenlooper. We'll go to Senator Sinema. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair Cantwell, and thank you to all our witnesses for joining us today to discuss this important topic. Semiconductors are essential for both the economic and national security of the United States. They're necessary technologies that Americans rely on every day, such as our phones, our cars, and our computers, and they're a key resource for our military. During the pandemic, we've seen the chip shortage directly impact everyday families across the country. Arizona is a national leader in semiconductor manufacturing and research and development. The semiconductor industry employs over 20,000 Arizonans. But over the past decades, America's domestic semiconductor manufacturing has fallen dramatically compared to the rest of the world, leaving us vulnerable and forced to rely on other countries. I was proud to be original co-sponsor of the CHIPS for America Act to help restore America's leadership in semiconductor manufacturing. And in response to the CHIPS Act, we've seen both Intel and TSMC announce significant investments in Arizona manufacturing. But Congress needs to finish our work and fund these CHIPS grants. Our bipartisan bill passed the Senate nearly a year ago, and we need to get this bill to the president's desk. So my first question is for Mr. Gelsinger. Arizonans are proud of Intel's long history in our state. Following passage of our CHIPS for America provisions, I was thrilled at Intel's announcement of a $20 billion expansion in Arizona, which will translate to thousands of new Arizona jobs. Could you provide an update on Intel's expansion plans in Arizona, the new jobs that will be created, and its impact on domestic chip manufacturing?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I am very happy and proud to support that our Arizona project is ahead of schedule. And, we've been able to accelerate that by about a quarter. We expect that those facilities will begin coming online in late 24. We'll employ 3,000 new Intel employees. We'll support on the order of 5,000 to 6,000 construction jobs for the next couple of years. And we've been thrilled by the support. And, in fact, we just had the First Lady join us for our Maricopa County education initiative that we just described there to start building the workforce that we need and some of the AI for the future training programs. So overall, the project is going well. And like you, we are proud residents of Arizona and growing there very rapidly and finding just a very, very warm welcome from the community as we continue to build this next phase of our manufacturing in Arizona.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear you're ahead of schedule. As I mentioned previously, Congress has yet to pass the final bill to provide funding for the CHIPS for America grants that will support our critical domestic semiconductor industry. Mr. Gelsinger, what does it mean for Intel, and particularly for Arizona's expansion project, if Congress cannot pass a semiconductor funding in a timely manner?
Yeah, and as I've described it, we will go slower and smaller without the funding. We will go bigger and faster with the funding. I'm putting as much pressure on our profitability and our balance sheet as I possibly can. And I'm doing that at the great howls of Wall Street, seeing our stock lowered as a result of these substantial investments. But even though I'm making such substantial investments, it's not enough to restore American leadership on this technology. It's about restoring our position in the world, about bringing this industry back from Asia. And we're proud of our investments in Ohio, in Oregon, and very prominently in Arizona. And we also have even broader plans and visions for the next phases of that could be enabled by the CHIPS Act beyond what we've already announced, Senator. And we'd be thrilled to discuss those further with you.
Thank you. I've long supported efforts to advance STEM education and ensure that Arizona has a highly skilled workforce that can help support technological advancements. So I was very pleased to hear about Intel's new Quick Start Workforce Development Program partnering with Mesa Community College. Can you describe that new program to train semiconductor technicians in Arizona? And thank you again, Mr. Gelsinger.
Yeah, and in summary, what it is a public-private partnership, in terms of them helping us to establish the training programs. We're helping with the curricula, and basically with very high probability, the graduates end up in a job as one of our facilities. So it reduces the risks that the students have. It increases the effectiveness of the educational program, and overall, it's building our workforce for the future. Overall, these types of programs have been seen extremely effectively, and we're thrilled to be able to participate there with Mesa Community College, Maricopa, right, and our other sites. This is the kind of model that lowers the cost of education, increases its effectiveness, and prepares the workforce of tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Cantwell.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. That concludes the first round as I know it, unless there is a member out there who is either quickly walking over here or is going to jump online. I see that Senator Scott wanted to ask a second round question. My intention is to allow you to do that, and then we would close out the hearing. So again, thank you that's kind of the schedule, unless somebody's out there who wants to quickly jump in here. So with that, Senator Scott.
Again, Chair Cantwell, I want to thank you for hosting this hearing. This is an important issue. It's a lot of money. I think all of you, each of you, all four of you have run successful businesses. And when you go to your boards and you say, I want to make an investment, you say, or what they say to you is, what are you going to get back? How much cash do you get back? You don't go then say, hey, I'm going to get a bunch of revenues. That doesn't help you. You don't say, hey, it's going to have a great economic impact, or gosh, I'm going to add 1,000 jobs. They say, if you're going to invest certain dollars, you're going to get something back. And so I was disappointed that nobody's come back and said, you guys want us to spend $52 billion, but nobody comes back and says, okay, for $52 billion, the taxpayers of this country will get a certain dollar back. None of you, I think, would, if you were the fiduciary, you would say, I'm going to do it without getting a return. So if you have something like that, I'd love to see it, because I have not seen it. But Mr. Gelsinger, Intel apologized to Chinese companies about American sanctions. Can you explain why that's appropriate?
Yeah, let me just add to the earlier comment on the ROI. The other, obviously, as we've already read in our written testimony, we've provided economic impact across our states, and we can, certainly dig into that more with you for the future. These are good ROI investments.
Can I just explain that for a second, though?
But it's also,
revenues is not return.
right? These are state
Revenues are not
economic
return.
impact
I mean,
returns. Again, we're
Economic
happy to have
impact
that
is revenues to a
conversation.
state. I mean, I probably did 1,000 economic deals when I was governor of Florida. I didn't say, somebody said, hey, I'll bring you revenues.
From a state perspective, revenues produce tax benefits, so we're happy to dig into that more with you. But it's also about returning this industry from Asia to American soil, right? It's also about national defense. These are policy issues for the nation that stretch well beyond just the economic direct benefits associated with it. Now, with respect to the China comments as well, the situation was in response to our supplier letter. This is a global supplier letter that we put in place to minimize risk, to manage our supply chain globally. No forced labor, no slavery, no other inappropriate actions. That global supplier letter inappropriately included a specific reference to one region in the world. It was a global letter covering many parts of our global supply chain that touches almost every country in the world. That was inappropriate. We revised the letter
So you think
appropriate.
it's inappropriate to say you shouldn't buy products that created with slave labor?
Our letter makes it very clear that we do not support slave labor anywhere in the world. However, as a global letter, we shouldn't have been calling out any particular region since there
I'd
are
call
many
out
regions
anybody
in the
for
world.
slave labor, not called out by regions. I think
Right.
that's inappropriate.
We could enumerate those across the world, and we didn't seem that's appropriate. The policies are
labor.
clear. We have reinforced this very, very aggressively, that our policies on such matters are clear, consistent across the world, and that's how we're going to continue to operate, and we've been proud to operate for decades in the past. And for that, you can be confident that we will be enforcing, not just the U.S. policies, obeying the laws of the U.S., but continue to be a great global employer and managing our supply chain with that in mind.
Buying products created with slave labor is wrong. Let's go to the next
We
question.
agree.
As a company, it seems to me your biggest risk is going to be exactly what's happening to Russia, companies doing business in Russia right now. If China, first off, you can look right now, people are mad that companies are doing business in China because of the human rights issues. Putting 1 million people in prison for their religion, taking away the organs involuntarily of prisoners, taking away the basic rights of Hong Kong citizens, threatening Taiwan. So already your company, anybody that does business in China has a risk. So aren't you, as a CEO of a company, shouldn't you be going to your board and saying, hey, look, we've got a big problem here? Because the American public, European, the people who live in Europe are going to say, hey, you got to get out of China because they're about to invade Taiwan. And when they do, what are you going to do when you have all these operations in China and the expectation is you shut down? Why wouldn't you have to move? Why wouldn't you, on your own, without getting a subsidy from the American government, the American taxpayer, say, I've got to get out of there right now?
The Chinese market is almost half of the semiconductor market in the world. Approximately half of that is manufacturing and supply. Approximately half of that's consumption. It's the fastest growing semiconductor market in the world. So if we're here to be the largest provider of semiconductors in the world, we must be participating in the largest market for semiconductors in the world.
I run companies. I don't care about being the largest. I care about what do I have to do to make sure my company remains viable? What are you going to do when China invades Taiwan and you're expected to stop doing business in China? You're just going to say, nope, I'm just going to keep doing business in China because I don't care.
Our expectation is that we will continue a long practice of deepening our investments in manufacturing and R&D in the U.S. and supplying the global market for semiconductors according to the laws, policies, and exports of the
So it won't
world.
bother you when they invade Taiwan?
It will
You're just
bother
gonna
me
keep doing-
enormously. In fact,
But you won't do anything
the
about it.
concerns that I have around the geopolitical situation drive the passion and urgency to build this industry in the U.S. This is a core reason why we are here. We have allowed this industry to shift to Asia. It is time for us to get it back onto American
should do it.
soil. And we are passionate
why
about
the taxpayers
that.
of Florida
That's
need
why
to
the CHIPS
subsidize
Act
you?
is so critical to get it done now.
So let's put the point. You can't tell me how a taxpayer of Florida gets a return.
I think we've addressed that.
There's no study, okay? You continue to apologize for American, American position that we shouldn't be doing business with a communist country where they have human rights violation, and you won't even acknowledge that you would even stop doing business in Communist China if they invade Taiwan. I think that's wrong.
Senator Scott, I don't think that that is what Mr. Gelsinger said. I do want to say, for the record, there is an analysis that was done by a Boston consulting group on the impact. Over 6 years, they project that a $50 billion manufacturing incentive would generate $147 billion to GDP and 1.1 million jobs. So I do think that there are some analysis out there. Every dollar from the federal government put towards the semiconductor research directs about delivers $16.50 to GDP as a dollar to investment ratio. So there are some analyses out there. I do think that they're important to take a look at this. I also think that these issues are very challenging to us in a global economy. I'm a person who supports trade. I actually think trade changes culture. I think that doesn't mean that we don't have bright lines, and I think we have a lot of bright lines in the United States, and one of them is about our national security and basically saying that we don't want to have communication products that have government backdoors to them, and we want anybody can be in the global supply chain, but if your government doesn't honor this aspect of making sure our architectures are protected and secure, then we don't want to do business. So, but this bill is really going to be about us creating a framework in which the United States gets that next generation, like my chart said, the next generation supply chain here. I want to thank all our witnesses. Mr. Feit, thank you for hanging in there from Europe. You didn't get as many questions as the other people, but I want you to know every time you talked, Mr. Gelsinger wrote down what you said. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because I think that is symbolic about the ecosystem that we're trying to create. If this all exists here in the United States and you have those closer relationships and the whole supply chain is talking to each other and they're talking about what their needs are and they're talking about the next generation, I guarantee you the United States will do the right things to help catch up on this shortage and lead the way in next generation technology. You heard from many of my colleagues who had various takes on this issue. You heard from Senator Rosen about her interest in the broadband system. I too have a very keen interest in our grid and electrification and what we're going to do to, we're not going to make any of the transformation without our grid providing more of the communication system. And so there's just so many opportunities before us. So I also want to thank you, particularly you, Mr. Gelsinger, but obviously our other witnesses. Look, we want to see these companies driven by good engineering. It's called the information age for a reason. That means that the opportunities are there, but we need the engineers. So I actually applaud some of the financial decisions you've been making because it's being based on good engineering. And I guarantee you in the end, that is what is going to be rewarded by American investment is solid, good engineering. We've led in this area in the past. We want to lead again. We appreciate what that'll do for us for innovation and for jobs in the United States of America. So thank you all very much for being here. The hearing will be open in the record for 2 more weeks. Senators will have until Wednesday, April 6th at noon to submit questions for the record. Witnesses will have 2 weeks to respond to those questions, and we appreciate your diligence on that. But that concludes today's hearing.